Right.
All right, recording in progress. Cool. All right, welcome everyone to the Memco Production Workshop 002. Today we're joined by Alex Wilcox, Tim Scholich, and Sam Franz, and they're going to give you some excellent information on all things music production. Take it away then, boys.
Cool. So, yeah, I guess I'm Alex, and I've been playing music since I was about 11. I started with guitar and then went into playing like blues and funk and alternative rock, got into playing into bands and all that, and eventually got into electronic production maybe when I was like 20 or so, and just maybe around there, and then just got really into it and wanted to do music, liked how I could make music with just a computer and didn't have to rely on other people, and eventually worked in some studios like in Austin, Texas, and then in LA, kind of more like pop, hip hop vibe stuff, and learned a lot of cool things there. Got really into techno, started making that, and now I am, I guess, just released like an album in 2019 with all sorts of music, but I feel like things are kind of now getting more started properly because I had a release recently on Mama Told Ya, which is the label of Anitha. That came out in November, I think it was November of last year, so 2021. And yeah, so I guess a big thing I wanted to talk about, which is in terms of like when I have a few students with Ableton, and I have like a YouTube channel where I talk about some production stuff. And I guess for me, I think a big thing I often like to talk about with people is, I think it almost seems weird. I don't know if everyone like agrees now, but I feel like a lot of times people don't like the idea of like copying other artists or something, for example. But this is kind of something I really embrace in the sense of learning. For example, like I guess when a lot of the music I listen to and I feel like has a lot of like unique qualities to it, or like the musicians I like tend to have, like they just sound like them, you know, but you can maybe hear where they got some influences from, but they'll ultimately have a pretty like unique vibe. And at least for me, what I like to think is I like to think maybe some stuff I'm doing has, you know, some kind of cool uniqueness or whatever to it, but I guess that's maybe more up to y'all. But I don't know, I especially when I was feeling more insecure about production, I just started finding tracks I really liked. So I'm sure everyone who's producing, at some point you hear a track and you're like, what the fuck's going on? How is the producer doing this? I mean, have y'all had that feeling, and you almost feel like a little bit insecure? Have y'all had that before?
Sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so that was really bugging me. And so I just started, like, for example, I'd take a track I really liked, put it into Ableton, and, you know, align it to the grid. Sorry for all the noise in the background, but, you know, just align it to the grid within Ableton. And then, for example, I'll listen. Let's just take, for example, I think I really like the song Blue Clouds by Mode Selector. I just think it's a cool track. And I think I've broken down this one, maybe, whatever. I'm just going to use it for the example anyway. But basically, so I know for a while when I would hear this track, I'd be like, how does this track work? Like, I just think it's super cool. It's crazy. And I was like, I want to make a track that sounds like this. So I'll take the track in Ableton and I'll play like the first 10 seconds. And I think in that track, in the first 10 seconds, I can hear a kick drum, an offbeat, and a chord progression. And yeah, I think that's basically it that's going on there. And so when I put it in Ableton, I'll literally like create, like I'll have the track up top, that's the master, and then I'll create a track below it, and I'll say, okay, I hear kicks in the track, so I'll make a MIDI track and I'll type in where the kick should be. and then I'll hear an offbeat, so I'll type in where the offbeat should be. And so basically, I'll just map out what I'm hearing, and I'll do that for the entire track. And so this is just super helpful because when you map out an entire track of something you like and you kind of just listen for each element and see when it's coming in, when it's coming out, it's kind of like taking a recipe and just it's kind of just like becomes like reading a recipe. So maybe I should share my screen for a second. Let me pull up Ableton right now. Is it cool? Can I do that? Can you give me permission to do that? I think I need permission.
Yeah, where are
Nathan,
they?
hit security and then hit enable screen share.
Okay, you should be good now.
Okay, so I can do it now. Okay, so let me pull something in here real quick. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so I can screen share now. All right, here we go. Can y'all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so this track is unfinished, and I don't know if it will be properly finished, but it's just one of mine. So let's just say I thought I just don't want to use another track for like copyright and stuff. So basically, like what I would do is I'll just start playing this track. Let me set this up. Can y'all hear this? Can y'all hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So basically, like if this was someone else's track and I'm like, how does this work? I'll literally just play the beginning and I hear like, what do we hear here? Okay, I hear a kick, like an offbeat, a breath at the beginning, and a bass line. So I'll just literally do this. Okay, here's a MIDI track. Here's a 4 on the floor kick. And I'll label that kick. Then I'll do an offbeat track. Label that offbeat. It sounds like it's doing like a double offbeat. And then I'll do a bass line track. And I'm not too concerned usually when I do this. If you want, you can like find out what each note is, but I mostly just like to get a rough approximation of what's going on, something that looks right. Here, wait, y'all's faces are in the way. Okay, and then we got that breath at the beginning. So now, when I look at this track, I have like something to kind of work off of. And so then I'll just keep going. And the cool thing is that basically as you do this, like let's see when something changes. Okay, like at this part, I took out the low end of the kick so I can make this white, for example. And then I say, okay, what happens on this next 8 bars? Okay, now there was a clap coming in at the beginning, so on and so forth. So like, this is just really helpful because especially when it comes to arrangement, which I feel like is a thing a lot of people struggle with, especially when you're newer to it. If you just do this over and over again, so let me just add that clap in. You'll just start to realize that, especially with techno and stuff, there's very often pretty like, you kind of start to get that there's like a formula for a lot of this stuff. And it's just cool because like now, for example, if you never thought of like taking out the low end of an 8-bar loop at the end, now maybe you'll try that because you saw someone else do it. And then maybe you didn't think to put a clap, just one clap, just to give a little suspense, but you don't want to go full on 2/4 clap yet. And so you just do this over and over again, and you learn these cool tricks. So for example, there's a track called Nights by Frank Ocean, and then Pyramids by Frank Ocean. These are two of at least my favorite Frank Ocean tracks. And if y'all listen to them, I don't know if have y'all heard these tracks?
Yeah.
Okay. Marcus, have you heard it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Do y'all know how like it switches up in the middle? or at one point, like there's a total switch of the instrumental and stuff.
Yes, I think so.
You remember? Yeah, like basically that happens, and like and this is super cool. And so to me, like in terms of like more popular music, this is like a pretty interesting arrangement. And at least when I heard these songs, I was like, damn, these are just super cool songs. How is this done? And so I did breakdowns on both of those. And the cool thing is then once you get everything to like look like what my screen's looking like here for like a track you might have been intimidated by, at least for me, it just gives me a lot more confidence because now I can like just see what's going on like in a very like clear cut way. And so I'm just like, oh cool, like this is like, whereas if I heard Pyramids or Nights for the first time, I'm like, what's going on? Everything's changing. This is crazy. Like if that's my understanding of it, after I do something like this, then it's more just like, oh, like the kick drum drops and then guitars come in and then the chord progression changes. So like it becomes more of a, oh, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. This is what's happening, rather than like a, whoa, this is crazy. You know what I'm saying? And like, and so then the cool thing is that when you go to make your own tracks, you can then maybe use that technique that you saw in that song, and maybe you can apply it to a techno song. So this is like, I think this is where it gets interesting, because then I don't know if it was like a subconscious thing, but like one of the tracks on the Mama Told You release I have is called Boo, and like it's I'm not gonna say it's as like profound or whatever as like the Frank Ocean transitions, but like I do have a big breakdown towards the end, and then like a beat switch up, and then the track continues, which I don't know. I don't hear. I think that happens sometimes. I think probably. I actually haven't listened to that much techno, but like at least for me, I was like, this seems pretty cool, and I don't know if sometimes I wonder if like I subconsciously did that because I was thinking of those like Frank Ocean tracks. I don't know for sure, but yeah, that's kind of why I think it's a good idea to like copy. Maybe copy is not the right word. I kind of like the word because it's a little provocative, you know. But like if you just break down other artists, you can get all these little ideas from them, and then even if you're making techno, you can take ideas from other genres and then push them into the mold of techno, or like I don't know. When I think of techno, I'm like, okay, I need to have banging drums, I need to have banging sub bass, and it needs to like, you know, work in a club. But after that, like you can kind of do whatever you want, I think, on top of it. And yeah, so okay, I feel like I'm rambling a bit now. Does any of this make sense?
Certainly, I think the breaking down of tracks, like I think that's the important part, is what you said, where you can see it in front of you and you know what's going on in this track, and you might be intimidated, but then you can see it, and it's a pure demystification of the process.
Yeah,
it's good.
and like there'll be times where especially like it's crazy because I remember I used to get stuck a lot, and it still happens sometimes, but like I'll have a loop or whatever and I like don't know where to go with it. But if you break down like all these tracks, you can be like, oh well, in track B I remember that they had a groove going with melody 1, and then they switched it up by inserting melody 2. So then when I'm working on my track, I'm like, oh okay, maybe I should just switch the melody, and then like that might help me keep it going. And then or I'll be like, oh, like I want to have a, like, yeah, basically stuff like that. Or like, how do I keep this loop interesting now? Oh, well, in that track, they added extra percussion for this chunk and then dropped out that percussion on this chunk. So maybe I'll try that. And you get some weird ones too. Like I think tracks Aquarius by Boards of Canada. Like sometimes you'll learn these like really weird ones where I think on that track, it's just like a groove going for like 8 minutes or something. It's just grooves forever. And at one point, I think the track's grooving for maybe a couple minutes, but it stays interesting because someone's just saying numbers on top of it. Like the beat's going and someone's just like 65, 63, like just saying all these numbers. And it's weird because as you're listening, like you're kind of like, what do these numbers mean or whatever? And I feel like that's a way of keeping interest over a groove, which I don't know. I can't think of many songs where like that's like a trick or like a musical strategy, if you will. And I just was like, oh, that's pretty neat. I don't know if I've ever successfully made it work, but there's been some times where I'm working on tracks where I'll try and do something like that, where I'm like, oh, maybe I can take this concept of like saying vague shit that doesn't mean anything. Well, I think on that track it actually does mean something, but you know, like that's just like another idea you can try. And so the more artists you copy, the more tricks you learn. And then when you go ahead and make your own stuff, like let's say you're making club techno, but you're making club techno influenced by like all this crazy shit that's unrelated. And then when you're done with your thing, then people are going to be like, what is this? Like, you know, like because maybe they're not used to hearing techno with like, I don't know, just random names like Elton John influences or Herbie Hancock or whatever. And so yeah, so that's why I'm a big advocate of this idea.
I have a question for you, Alex.
Uh-huh.
This is great, and you know, I think your breakdowns on YouTube are also like super instructional in this way. And we've had this conversation before, but I'm curious in this context to hear your thoughts about how some other people approach production, because I think that the natural response to this kind of like arrangement breakdown is folks who think about, like, people always say like developing a sound or focusing on sound design. And I think a lot of maybe not like underground techno, because many of the like same tropes, same samples, same breaks, same like sounds are actually reused in that context. But in a lot of other electronic genres, people emphasize focusing on sound design and like developing your sound first.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, you know, what would you say to that person, that producer who has been told up until this point that what they really need to learn is like sound design or how a synth works or something like this, and how what you're doing helps, augments, changes that somehow, or maybe this is kind of about the importance of arrangement, maybe in techno music specifically. But I'm kind of curious to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I guess. And again, this is like everything I say, and I hope I say this to like my videos a lot, is like if you like I like what I'm doing with my music, but I recognize some people are gonna produce differently than me, and they will still make really dope shit. And some people will do things in a way I really don't like, but their end result might be super fire and stuff maybe I can't do or whatever. So I just want that like caveat out there before I start talking, so I don't sound, you know what I'm saying? But for me, like I don't know. I think it is important to, you know, it's good to know like how a synth works generally and stuff. It's good to know well, how do I'm not sure how to answer the question, because I think I used to have a much more forward answer of like, don't worry about sound design. But I don't
That's
know
the one that I was expecting, but I'm curious to hear how your thoughts have changed. So,
well, I think it's like I guess it's like sometimes I think the reason why I rant about it is sometimes I feel like I would get like a lot of people commenting on my videos like, why aren't you doing the sound design? And the reason for that, at least partially, is because there's so many people doing videos on sound design. And I mean, I guess, yeah, well, a thing I would say, which I guess is still kind of true, is like, you can have cool sounds, but if you don't know how to arrange a track, like no one, I might not care, but I don't know. Some people like listening to like weird sounds, I guess. But like, I don't know, to me, like, I just feel like arrangement's super important and sometimes is not looked at enough. So maybe that's why I've been emphasizing it so much, which isn't to say sound design is not important, but like, I'm also the type of producer where so much of what I do is just presets that I modulate a bit, or like increasingly I feel like I'm just throwing on a preset and then I throw on a kick drum, I throw on a snare. It's usually not that crazy. It's just I use stock Ableton. I think on the Mama Told You release I had a lot of stock Ableton drums and massive presets, like the old massive, not even the new shit. And so I guess sometimes it's like I don't know, like sometimes it's funny though, because I met a producer, I know you kind of like this too, Sam, who like likes to spend hours on the kicks and makes really cool stuff. But like for me, it's more just I like to get into the flow of things. I feel like I'm not answering your question, but like I guess I'm still saying some ideas here. Because basically I feel weird being super anti-sound design because I don't know, some people tell me I have cool sound design, even though I don't think about it. And like when I think I mentioned yeah, like I might have a new record coming out soon. The person who listened to it was like, you have really cool sound design. I was like, okay, like, but for me, like I'm not doing some crazy shit. I'm not using some crazy plugins. Usually I'm just like, I don't know. Sometimes, but while I'm just ranting, I think it's a mistake. This is one thing I am still pretty passionate about, which is if you think like you need to get a good, like an expensive piece of gear and that's going to make your music better, it's probably not going to make your music better. Yeah, like if you know what you're doing, you can do everything with stock Ableton and make super fire crazy shit. Don't get me wrong, it's fun to have the toys, and maybe for some people, like if you're a pure musician, I shouldn't say pure musician, that's not a good way of putting it, but like let's say you're like a keyboardist or something, and then you go into electronic production, maybe it is super helpful for you to have an actual keyboard. And like I personally I don't really use hardware much right now. I like hardware, but whatever, but like it is fun to have the knobs and stuff. But generally speaking, I would say it's a big mistake if you think your music doesn't sound good because you don't have the right plugins or whatever. That's generally speaking, it's probably not the problem. I guess technically it could be for someone, but it's probably not. Like you probably just know what you're using. Like people were making fire in like the 90s with like some drum machine and a synth and from a pawn shop, you know? So we got so much technology. I don't know. Sorry, and rant.
No, that's super. I think that's super right, and
yeah,
like you've given me a lot of inspiration thinking about because I think like a lot of producers A/B with their favorite tracks in terms of mixing, but not in terms of arrangement, and it's like it's interesting, you know, how you place emphasis on breaking down tracks that way. And the thing that I was going to say is like it also seems like a lot of techno, and especially like even like subgenres of underground electronic music, like say you think about like footwork or jungle or electro, right? Yeah. Those genres are built on like a sample pack, like in a lot of ways, basically, you know what I mean? Like, and that's not to deny that people aren't doing creative stuff, but like it's like the 909 drums are like essential, and yeah. You know, that's what makes up the genre. And so it really is in that context like all about arrangement, it seems like.
Well, one thing I like to say too is like I think if you were like a badass illustrator, like I feel like generally speaking, right? I mean, I'm not an illustrator, so I feel a bit weird saying this, but I feel like it's probably true. I feel like if you're probably like an insane drawer or whatever, like you should be able to like do something pretty cool with the pencil, even though that's existed for a long time. There's probably some problems with that statement, but I think you'll know what I mean. It's like if you're like a badass chef and like you're given an onion, you should probably be able to like do something pretty cool with that onion, even though it's just an onion, you know? And like, yeah, so I guess part of the, I can't remember exactly why I started talking about this. I know it had something to do with what you said. So I'm a little tired. I didn't sleep much last night.
No, like the 909 sample pack.
Oh yeah. Well, like, yo, I love Paul Kalkbrenner. I love Skrillex as well. I at least I liked a lot of Skrillex's solo stuff when he was blowing up back in the day. I guess some of his new stuff's okay, but it's just, I feel like it's less interesting. But like, I've heard both of them using shit from sample packs. Yeah, that's another thing. I can't stand it when people like hate on sample packs or hate on. I used to be like this. I was like, I'll never use an 808 or a 909. That's what I was saying, because like everyone uses it. But like, again, like every chef uses a knife. I don't know. Every chef uses like some lettuce or whatever. It's just like, just be good with what you're using. And like, I don't know. It's yeah. It's But then again, some people really have a good time, like working on a kick all day, and if they end up making a cool track out of that, then if that works, that works, you know. That's why like I start with this caveat of like I'm a little less intense sometimes, because like I don't know, I just have a certain vibe and a certain thing I go for. I started playing on guitar, and when I would really be and I was obsessed with that thing. I play that all the time, and like for me, I got the most enjoyment when I would practice. It would be like 20 minutes to like 2 hours usually of just like improvising. And I just felt it, and it was great. So I try and take that mentality into my electronic production. So for me, that means I need to go as fast as possible. And presets and like stuff that just sounds good to start with makes it easier for me. And then I just focus on the vibe. I just try and just get it all out and just go with the flow. And so I need to go as fast as I can. And so like presets and stuff help with that, I think. So yeah.
I have one more question that is related to a common producer complaint that I personally feel all the time, which is like, there's a billion videos on how to make a loop into a song, you know? And I feel like your method is like basically how to do that. But
yeah,
I was wondering if you could frame what you've just said in that context, which is a question that people ask all the time. And I personally deal with, which is like, you have a great loop. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, I had this crazy idea. Or I was experimenting and I found an idea that like one amazing idea that I really, really like. And it's like every single producer that I know, including myself, is like, oh, well, I have 30 projects, you know, just sitting around that are like a loop and I don't know where to go with it. And so, can you maybe reframe in that context?
For me, it really helps to have an end goal sometimes, like, or at least recently, like honestly, when, so the Mama Told You thing happened because Anna, who's Anita's is Anna, she bought one of my tracks on Bandcamp. It was this track called Sleep Paralysis. And I messaged her and she was like, send me some tracks. And basically, I listened to the last release they had, and I listened to my sleep paralysis track because I was like, she likes sleep paralysis. And so I kind of had this idea in mind of like, let's just like, you know, let's make tracks that will like kind of work with that vibe, you know, with like what they're doing. But, you know, I guess do, you know, I felt like there were some components that I was hearing that were common. And I was like, okay, but I'll do it. And I'll like, I guess, you know, just go for it. And so that's helpful in a way to have like and I think that may have been one of the first times I really got super solid with a final idea. Now I'm doing this all the time where like, I'll make a track. Like I have a couple tracks that are like fast techno, but like super melodic. So it's almost like disco. So I'm like, okay, I really like this 1 and 2 tracks. So let's make like 2 or 3 in the same world, 2 or 3 more, and like just finish it and just start pitching it or something. But on a more like micro level in terms of like how to finish stuff, if you break down all those tracks and you learn all those different techniques and all those strategies, oh, insert melody 1, then melody 2. Oh, drop out drums for 16 bars and then add them at the end of the 4 bars. Oh, add random vocals. Oh, take a cool loop you have, don't add anything new, just rearrange that loop you already have, and then that's your B section. If you just have all these different ideas in your mind, and then when you sit to produce and you're just going hardcore fast, then the second you get stuck, just think of one of those things and then try it, and hopefully it'll work. And another thing, this is just me, I feel like so often for me, if I spend too much time on a loop, I get so biased to how it sounds, or I'll start to get hypercritical of something that I don't need to be hypercritical of. And so part of me has this mentality of, I try to finish a track in one sitting, and I try and just work with the track. And so again, having all those techniques that you've studied from other artists in mind that you can just throw in real quick helps you keep it moving. And then also, at least for me, I just try and trust my first instinct. If something sounded tight, that's cool. Let's keep going now. I don't want to keep listening to it and start to hate it because it sounded tight when I first heard it. Like, it's kind of like, I'm sure y'all have some friends who have like never produced. And when you like, it's so fun, you know, you like give them a mic and maybe you like put a vocoder on their voice. Like, you remember the first time y'all heard, I don't know if y'all vocoded your voice before, or like Sam, I know we did auto tune once.
Certainly.
Like, you know, the first time you hear a cool effect and you're just like, oh, that's super cool, you know? Right? You all know
Yeah,
what I'm talking about.
definitely. Yeah,
Okay, so I feel like it's funny because like I feel like then over time maybe you get jaded, or I don't know, maybe this is just me. But now when I'm producing, I want to have those moments and then I record it, it's done, I move on. Because you know, when you keep listening to the vocoded voice, you might get bored of it. But you remember the first time you heard it, was super fire. So like, so just get it down and keep going and then export it and then forget about the track and listen to it in a couple, just make more tracks and then listen to it later. And then hopefully you forgot about it. And then you're like, what's this? And you're like, oh, this is fire, because it's your first instincts. And that's helpful for me, I think. I guess I'll talk about the conveyor belt real quick, unless y'all have a question. I think the conveyor
No, do the
belt's
conveyor
good.
belt, and then I have one more question.
Okay.
Also, you know, I don't know how much time you have, but
I got about 5 minutes. My computer's about to die anyway, so.
okay.
But this is the conveyor belt. It's what I just mentioned. Basically, I mean, it's basically what I just mentioned. Like, for me, this helps. Keep making tracks, get them done as fast as you can, forget about them, make new ones. And so then, like, as you're making the new ones, those old ones are going around the conveyor belt. They're over here, they're over there. You totally forgot what it was. And then this new one's over here. You're making new ones. So many tracks. And like, there's so many tracks I like, I'll open it. It's from like a year ago. I totally forgot what it was. And I'm like, oh, this is sick. And it's almost done already. Perfect. And then like, it's because it's on the conveyor belt, you know? And so like, I don't know. Now I know, like, if I'm making something now, it's probably not going to come out for a long time. And I just trust the conveyor belt, because like, then it helps me listen to the track again with like a fresh perspective. And hopefully, because I really went in on it the first time, because I tried to get it done in one sitting, perhaps, like, I just have to do a few things, maybe mix it a little better, but hopefully it was mostly done. And then, yeah, so I'm a big fan of the conveyor belt idea. And then you also don't get stuck. Don't get too attached to the track. I think that can be okay fucking up the track, you know, sometimes. But yeah.
Last cue is what's up, Till? Is you emphasize speed in making tracks a lot, and
Yeah.
I think this is also contrary to popular sentiment, which is like spend 50 hours on like one sound and like really make it good and like get like squeeze every last drop out of it. And you're like, no, just like make basically the track in like 30 minutes and then like forget about it and then come back to it and spend another 30 minutes and it's done, you know?
And I feel like too,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. No, I just want to hear you talk about that.
There's so many times you see interviews of people where they make a hit or something, and I feel like this is just my feeling, but from reading a lot of interviews and stuff with artists, because I feel like so often when someone makes the fire track, they're like, oh yeah, I did it in like a second. Like, I think Mr. Wazo did Flat Beat in like 2 hours, which was like why he's able to like produce films now. And then like, I think, what was his name? There was that rapper guy. Da 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 banana da 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 da. You remember that song? I don't know. Like, Kanye used it. Oh my god, I don't remember his name.
Oh,
but
designer.
Yeah, I heard the beat for that track. I think it was made in like 20 minutes, and I don't know. Like, I think it's just, you just need to get your vibe out, and so for me, speed helps with that. But yeah, I don't know. I still like getting the most out of each sound, especially with like simple music, like Sucker Pin by Mode Selector, really cool track. Well, it's not the craziest mix. I think the mix actually could, I don't know. But like, I actually do stress like getting the most out of a sound, because sometimes I think people overlayer everything and think their bass isn't big. And so they add like 5 bass lines and then it gets tiny because there's 5 bass lines. But that's just me. But yeah, I mean, yeah, sometimes I don't know that like I said, I heard Paul Kalkbrenner using a loop, like a melody loop from some track recently. But I liked the track when I heard it. I don't know. So I don't care. Yeah. I don't know why I should. If no one knew, no one would care. I don't know.
No,
What are we
this is
doing?
great. This is super great. It's
Yeah.
very inspiring, and it's like definitely contrary to like some popular, perhaps toxic sentiment, which is like, don't ever use a sample, synthesize everything, you know, and spend
That's the thing. If you want to
layer.
do that, go. I think there's some producers. I can't remember the name because I used to be friends with this producer he's really good, and he is more like that, I think. And he showed me some artists who are like that, and like I hear the shit, and I'm like, oh, this is good. But so like, because I imagine, I guess some people just like really get a lot of joy. Like to me, it's like just
I think Alex died.
Yeah, battery probably went out. Well, we thank Alex Wilcox. That was good. There he is.
Alex, you got to connect to audio. Connect audio.
Yeah, we still can't hear you.
Still can't hear you. Can't hear you. Okay. He's going to rejoin. Okay, I just unmuted, so go ahead and say it, and I think everyone can hear you.
Oh, y'all can hear me?
Maybe, yeah, they can hear you. Okay.
Okay, y'all. So my sign off was just do what feels good to you. If you want to spend a little extra time on your kick or whatever, do it. This is just my take on it. Just have fun, get your emotions out however you can, and don't listen to me to judge you. Yeah.
Did y'all hear that? He said, just have fun, get your emotions out, and do what feels good. Yeah, okay. So,
and don't listen to me too much.
Yeah, don't listen to him too much. All right.
All right, thank you, Alex.
Nice. Thanks, Alex. That was amazing.
Sure.
Yeah. Have a safe flight.
All right, thanks. Send
Peace.
my love.
Yeah.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, well, that was some excellent knowledge on copying other artists.
Oh, yeah.
It's very good. All right, Till, floor is yours, bud. You can go as long as you want, or until 9, or
yeah. I don't
3
think
maybe?
I will use the whole hour. And also, I'm curious. So I saw Nathan, you like produced and released stuff. Sam, have you done the same?
Yes.
Okay. And how about you, Marcus?
Marcus said he's producing stuff earlier. He's currently working on stuff.
Okay. Because I actually intended this to be like a basic lecture or like session about okay, yes.
No problem.
A
Glad you're
basic,
here.
yeah. A basic session about sound synthesis. But honestly, like if I now start with like what's a sine wave, I feel like kind of dumb telling it to the two of you.
No,
Well,
do
we're
it, do
also
it, do it.
recording right now.
Oh,
I
for
gotta
the
go
recording.
I gotta get the
No,
door,
and
but
it's cool to always go back to the basics and hear how other people talk about them. So
Yeah.
I would say do it.
All right, cool. Then let me start with an intro and then we can go into some details. Can I put it here? Too many windows. No, I gotta share my screen. Of course. Give me a sec. So share screen. Yes, you should be able to see that now.
Yep.
All right.
Got it.
So I'm just gonna look at my intro words. So yeah. Hey everyone, welcome to the sound synthesis workshop. First, a word about the synths. So I'm just gonna talk about digital synths, like VSTs, and not about hardware for now because it's like easier as an intro. You can download if you have a DAW, digital audio workstation, you can download a lot of free VST synths. I personally really like the Arturia collection. They often have sales where they reduce the price, or you could also download it like a cracked version. To play sounds on a synth, you can play the notes with your computer or MIDI keyboard, and then every sound you make on the synth is called a patch. So there are like usually a lot of pre-made patches, but you can also make your own and then save it. With digital synths, it's pretty nice because you can always, if you record something, you can always go back and change the notes or like change the parameter. And hardware synths are harder to use or like harder to use for tracks because often you are just making the sound in the moment and then playing it, and then you have to record it, and then that's it. So like what you record is what you have, and then after it's hard to like go back and change anything. And it can be a lot of fun though, if you like know more and play more with hardware synths. So yeah, just a basic thing about the sound waves. Yeah, what you're making with a synth is a wave of sound, and that can take different shapes and forms. So basically, a sound wave, as you can see here, is defined by the wavelength and the amplitude, and then also the shape. So you can see here, sorry, it's a triangle. Is it called triangle? Where you have like a short, high-pitched sound, so it's like pretty short, and the amplitude is also short. And then here you have a giant gong, and there it's much bigger and longer. So then basically everything you do, all the knobs you have on the synth are to control the different ways that you can shape this wave that you can see there. For beginners, we have the oscillator. We don't have to worry about like what control voltage is right now. Yeah, but in the oscillator, it's basically like it's the source of the sound, and it's called oscillator because the sound is oscillating. And you often have different, you can first of all choose the form of the wave. So this is a sine wave, square wave, triangle, and sawtooth. And the names are from the shapes. kind of self-explanatory. And before I just go through this article, I kind of like to visualize it here for the start. But now let's do something in Ableton. So as I said, I like the Arturia collection, and there's one in there, which is the Prophet. And then with the Prophet, let me just oops, do the settings. Okay, this is better. So I'm just gonna set it so that I can play with my computer keyboard. And this is the Prophet 5. Let me check. Yeah, can you hear the audio?
I can't.
Oh, you can't. Okay, give me a second.
I think if you go to Ableton and then you go to the audio device and change it to Zoom, like in the
Okay.
Ableton preferences.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Zoom audio, yeah. And I think now it's just
still nothing.
Still nothing. Yeah, now it was just on Zoom. I just need to go on Zoom real quick, but somehow I hit the controls, so now I cannot see them.
I was just listening to some Macro Blank today. It's good stuff.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I just discovered it yesterday. Insane. Super chill.
If you go to the Zoom app, I think, and then
yeah, but somehow the
because your screen
controls are
sharing.
gone. Yeah, and I hit the screen sharing controls, so I can't access them. I don't know why. Let me drop out, I guess. Why can I not? Like, if you hide them, there's got to be some way to unhide them, but I cannot figure. Back to meeting.
Maybe in the top like menu bar is one of those for Zoom.
Here. Oh, here you mean? Yeah. Okay. Stop share. Okay, yeah, there it is. Let me share again, and then I have the controls, and I will share the computer sound, and then.
Yeah, now if you set it to Zoom audio, it should work, I believe.
So right now you're not hearing it?
No. Still not.
Okay. Zoom audio device. Yes.
Yeah.
Got it.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay. So, after a little Zoom excursion, always fun. Yeah, I like the Prophet for this session because the different sections are pretty clearly labeled, and we can just go through each one step by step, and I think it's a good way to like show how the knobs affect the sound. We can start with this basic sound, Fascination. Why not? You can choose any other patch if you want to. And as I said, the oscillators, so there are two oscillators here. They are the source of the sound. And what you can change is the type of sound wave. So this is the triangle, and this is the square wave. So this is just a square. Sometimes you don't hear a big difference. And then the frequency, so like would be the pitch, control the pitch. And then so the frequency is the wavelength. So if they are like pretty close together, then it's higher, I'm pretty sure. And then if you spread further apart, it's lower. Oh no, that's the pulse width, sorry. but the amplitude is probably the determines the pitch. So the PW here, that's the pulse width, so like how far spread apart is. Let's hear how it sounds. Yeah, you can hear a bit of a difference. Also, like with synths, it's always, you just have to try it. Like you can never like conceptualize everything in your head. Some people maybe can do that, but it's always about turning the knobs and seeing what the knob does. That's, I would say, is how you learn how to play synth. Okay, so now we have two oscillators. Maybe we can turn this one off. So it's just two square waves. The frequency, maybe you can set this one up. Okay, so now the second oscillator has a little bit of a different frequency. So I guess it's a bit more interesting. You can also fine tune it if you want. Down here. So we have the source of the sound. Those are the two basic sections. I'll talk about these later. And then the next one I would go to is the mixer. There you can choose how much of the sound of oscillator 1 and oscillator B you want to include. For example, like, yeah, right now you're hearing both. Maybe turn off oscillator A. So now you can like play around a little, like how you want the overall sound to sound. And in this one, there's also noise generator. So if you want some sound, you can add it here. It's kind of like noise is always, it's kind of static. Kind of if your TV doesn't receive a channel, that's like the sound it makes. Like, and it's nice for adding some texture or something that sounds like a wave. Yeah, stuff like that. Or if you like just use a noise generator and like make short sounds, then it can be used, for example, as a hi-hat. And that's kind of fun because then you can like play around with the sound of a hi-hat. Like for example, if you know Stefan Bosin, he does that a lot. Yeah, so we got the oscillators. We determine like how much of these oscillator we want to hear. And then the next section is the filter section. There you have the cutoff, resonance, and envelope and mount. And this, I forget what this was it. But those three are the most important things in every filter. Most of the time, like if there's one basic filter, it's a low pass filter. So it's cutting off like the high frequencies. There's also a high pass filter to cut off the low frequencies. So if you look here, yeah. So if you have like these frequencies, and then if low pass filter cuts off the high ones, and the low pass filter cuts off, sorry, the high pass filter cuts off the low frequencies. So because the highs are passing through. Yeah, let me show you what it looks like. So if you turn the cutoff down, it's like, yeah, more muffled. And honestly, the cutoff knob on any synth is like one of the most fun knobs always, because if you're playing and then like it doesn't get louder, yeah, in a way it gets louder, but also gets more dynamic always. Like when you have a track and then you play with the cutoff. It's always fun. Resonance, it determines the peaks in the, like what is cut off or not. So like if you turn it up really high, it can sound kind of annoying, but can also sound interesting. And if you turn it really low, the signal is much clearer. Sometimes, for example, if you want this kind of acidy sound, then it's a good idea to turn the resonance up, because it gives it like this special, I don't know what to call it, but it's definitely, it helps with the acid. And envelope amount is basically, it's like saying how much, it sounds kind of like it makes the whole sound bigger or louder. So if you turn it down, it's kind of more muffled, and if you turn it up, bigger and louder. So those are the basic two things that filter the sound coming from the oscillators. And you can just apply the filter and say, yeah, this is the filter. And in addition, in this section, you have attack, decay, sustain, release. And you notice they're the same over here for the amplifier. And those things are called an envelope. And what an envelope is, let me show you. Again, some nice visualization. Yeah, so you have the level of the sound, and then you have time on this graph. So the attack determines, like this is the signal passing through. So the attack tells you how quick does the signal come in from 0 to 100, so to say. Then decay says, like how long does it take for you to come to the baseline of the level, so to say. And then sustain tells the synth how long this signal will be sustained. And release is after, so it's when you hold the key. When you hold the key, this gets triggered. And then when you release the key right here, that's the release, about how much time will pass until there's no more sound. So let me just demonstrate it. And I guess I was just talking about the envelope for the sound, but you can also have an envelope about the filter. So if you say the filter gets applied here, like really quickly to a higher level, and then a little bit less, and then later when you release, even less. Let me show you. So here, the filter is applied directly. If I turn it up, it takes time for it to open up, basically. And then the decay, we could turn it down. So it's like, zoop, like it goes up, but then comes down quickly again. And here again, you have like a smoother glide. Let's look at the sustain. Yeah, so it's like a really long sound. If we turn it down, here, this one you can't hear that well, I guess, but you get the idea. And then with the release, it's really high up. So now I have my finger on the key, and now I release it, and so it takes some time. If I do this, then the filter closes immediately, basically, when I release the key. And then the same thing here, if I like turn down all of this, so this is the envelope of the sound of the amplifier. So how loud will the sound be? Now everything is turned down, so it will be like very short. So if I turn up the release, some more. Turn up the decay. Turn up the release a lot. And the attack is also always fun to play with, because it gives it like more, it's not like immediately the sound comes in, but it just takes some time and like makes it more like slow or dreamy. Let me show you. Even more. Yeah, and so those are the basic sections to create a sound: oscillator, mixer, filter with the envelope, and then the amplifier with the envelope. You also, it really depends on which synthesizer you use. Like every synthesizer is different, so all these controls might look a little different, or there's additional stuff like unison or chorus or like other audio effects. I'm not gonna get into all of these right now. What I do want to mention, though, a very important concept for synthesizers is the LFO, the low frequency oscillator. So here you saw the envelopes, which is basically a form of modulating the signal. So modulating the filter signal, for example. And you can also use something else to modulate signals, which is an oscillator that is so low in frequency that you cannot hear it. That's why it's called low frequency oscillator. And it's basically like the same, it's like a triangle wave or square wave, whatever you choose. Let's choose this one. So like by clicking the buttons, you can select the waveform. And then here you have the rate, which is how fast the oscillator will oscillate. And then down here, you can choose the destination of what will it oscillate. So if we now have the triangle wave, this is what it looks like. And we want to modulate the filter. So if we say we modulate the filter cutoff, this could be like, what if I'm just playing and I turn it down and up. It's just like me manually doing it. And what the LFO does is that it basically automates your movement of the knob. So you can say, okay, as I turn the rate up, we should hopefully see or hear what I mean. So with the triangle wave, this is the rate and the destination is set to filter. So let's see, like now it's very slow. You can only hear it a little bit in the background somehow. often there's also like a dry wet knob, like how much you want the LFO to affect the destination, which can be helpful. On this one, this doesn't have it. I could try something else. Doesn't seem to be doing much. And there's also for this one, there's no there's no like extra settings. So sometimes they're like advanced settings where you can play around with these things, but not for this one. Let me see if I can show you for another synth. So yeah, this is the basic idea of an LFO. And as I said, this is just the Prophet 5 here, like the digital version. If you now just go to a different one, this is a different synth, you might be confused, like, oh, what's happening here? But actually, if you like go step by step, you have oscillator, filter, amplifier, and 2 LFOs even. And you have the amp envelope that would show you attack, decay, sustain, release, the filter, and a mixer envelope. And then this here, yeah, so this might look like very complicated or confusing, but it's pretty cool because you can say what source modifies which thing. So if we say now LFO1, it's right here, this modifies the filter cutoff. So if I play, and then here, actually here you can see the amount. So if I turn up the amount, yeah. So it's slowly modulating the filter opening and closing, and then you can modulate like this. Maybe another good one. Oh, I can't. So it looks like I cannot modulate the amp envelope. That's interesting. Or you could try to modulate the frequency. So we have LFO1 on the filter cutoff. We could also, okay, that's maybe now too advanced, but just to show you, you could also have LFO2 modulating LFO1, the rate. So LFO1 is like going like this, and then as the signal of LFO2 goes up and down, you could say LFO1 goes like faster and slower, and it's modulating the filter faster and slower. Let's see if that works. Yeah, as you can see, it's not straight, but it's kind of going faster and slower and like adding more life to it. And yeah, modulating different things, that's a lot of fun. Like once you get into it, you'll see how it just adds a lot to your sound. And then if you record something, just a sequence or like a melody, and then play around with your knobs and the modulations, then you'll have a lot of fun. I would say, yeah, like if you have any questions, or like I want to hear your opinions, how you synthesize sounds, what you like or what you are annoyed by. Would be curious. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Yeah, it's just basically like download a free VST synth and like play around with it, turn some knobs, and you'll get the hang of it. And then when you want to record something, you don't only have the knobs here, but you can also make automations in Ableton and kind of play around with these parameters over time. So I don't need to show you, I guess, right now. We can do that another time. But yeah, let me know how you do it.
Well, I do it pretty similarly. Not gonna lie. I mean, most of the time it's all VST work because, like you said, that just the barrier with recording is really a problem sometimes. But there's one synth that I particularly like to use, which it's called Synth One. It's just a freeware synth that you can just get online, download it for free and use it. It doesn't have like a keyboard or anything, but it's an analog emulation synth, and it's just the sounds it has are very nice on that. It's a good one. But then also I do a lot of hardware stuff as well, and the benefit there for me is that it's like you're actually playing an instrument and not just programming an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So,
like, what do you use? Which kind of hardware?
I also have an Arturia. I have a microbrute, and they just make good products. They just make good stuff to use, and a lot of variety of sounds, even within one machine, that just allows for you to change a patch in a very interesting way while you're still, like, I don't know, playing the same line or playing the same part. I think that's the draw of physical, is that you can actually play it and not just program it in, and you can go with the flow, and it just becomes really nice. But besides the Arturia, I also use a modular synth system that I have been building for the past 18 months or so.
Cool.
That's
there
on another level.
you can really go down that hole. That's
Yeah.
a lot of fun. I also own the Arturia Beatstep Pro for sequencing, and to me it's like one of the most fun things to put on a sequence, like program a sequence there, connect it to a synth, and then just play around with the knobs and hear what it sounds like.
That's my current process with the modular, as I have the Beatstep for sequencing as well, because with such like a small case, like I just wasn't gonna fit sequencing in there.
That's dope.
I'm curious how this affects like your production process overall. So like Alex just spoke about like making full tracks, and so do you often start by synthesizing a sound that gives you an idea, or is that like your general approach to making like a track?
Yeah, or I usually start with a preset and then adapt the preset, or like play around with the preset. If it's on a software synth. Like on a hardware synth, I would rather make my own sounds or you have to make your own sounds basically. But with digital synths, yeah, I like take one that I like and then start with that, maybe do a melody. Or I also like using samples a lot. So sometimes I would just start with a sample. And then usually the drums come later. I usually don't start with programming drums.
I mean, do you typically begin with kind of like this back to basics approach where you're just like spinning knobs on software VSTs when you're trying to make tracks, or?
More like finding a sound that I like and like, yeah, adapting it a little bit and then playing a melody and then see if the melody is cool, and not like recording the whole thing, but just maybe a 4-bar loop or 8-bar loop, and then like make the next one and then make the next one and like just put in stuff. And then it will get full, obviously. So then I just like mute and unmute tracks and see, oh, like how maybe that like that's way too much. I only need 1 or 2 of these channels, and then put drums under it and then see if there's a good vibe. I would say that's usually my approach. I would really like though to, yeah, I use for hardware synths, I have a Moog Mini Tower, like for bass, and it's super easy to use. You don't have to program much. Like there's always a sound that you can use. Like with Modular, it's like, okay, you got to work to get to a sound. So I really want to get more into like improvisation. I don't have a like physical drum machine, but I still like kind of I'm looking for people to collaborate with, that someone is on the drum machine, someone is on the synth, and maybe another synth, and then just like play, not even record. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, jamming with other people with electronic instruments is quite a pleasure. I'll be down to do that when I get back to Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
I'm curious how you think about having this kind of knowledge of like waveforms, you know, how like a synth works, because I think we've heard earlier today, and then like we've already said that like a lot of people just begin with like samples, or like begin with like a preset that they slightly modify by just twisting knobs. And like the first part of the presentation was like actually how audio works, technically speaking. And so I'm curious how you think about like that, how that knowledge plays a role in like you producing music. Like does it like matter a lot when you're making music, or do you think that it like helps a lot to like have fundamental knowledge of how like synthesis works? Or yeah, like how does that augment how you produce tracks?
Yeah, I would say over time you gain the knowledge. Like I wasn't reading a book in the beginning about synthesizers, or like not really, and then like I knew it, and then I like created sounds. It's more like while you play around, you or like read manuals are also very interesting. I probably like underutilize manuals a lot, but you can gain a lot of stuff from reading those. And then while you play around with sounds, like, oh, the filter does this, and you maybe know it subconsciously in a way, and then when you read it like on some website, then you understand it more or better. And then when you use a different synth where the knobs might look or are named different, then it's just way easier to say like, okay, this is the LFO and this is how I can modulate something. It would be also really cool to just have like, there's the sound, and then you're like, okay, I want to make that sound, and I need to do these things to create that sound. I am definitely not at that level, but I think that could help you a lot if you're someone who's like, oh, okay, I have heard this super cool synth in a track and I want to replicate that and use it in my track. Then you can say like, oh yeah, that's probably like modulating this, and maybe the frequency of the other oscillator is off. Like that could be really helpful. But also if you're too technical, then it's probably not going to work out. Like if I have something where I'm like, oh, I want to go in the direction of making that, then I don't usually get there, but like somewhere halfway and the sound is already cool. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to use that. What how do you use synths, Sam?
Like typically I just have like a couple synths that I know well enough that I can make the sounds that I want. So like specifically I use Serum for like all of the pad and lead sounds that I use. And then I use Operator for bass sounds, specifically because I just like how quick it is to make kind of like a interesting kind of like sine wave based FM synth basically with it, where you have like one voice modulating another voice. And it gives like a rich sound, but it's just like one voice, which I find appealing. It makes like really simple but full bass sounds. And so yeah, I just have like two go-to synths that I use for pretty much everything. And then like, yeah, samples and effects and that sort of thing.
Nice.
Yeah, going deep on one to two to three synths is I feel like is probably more valuable than having a bunch of them, because just knowing how to use them and knowing how to get the sounds that you are imagining or hearing and wanting to recreate, the better you know one synth, the better time you'll have achieving your synthesis goals, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's totally right, Nathan. And that's kind of why I spent a lot of time when I was like really like much younger actually learning Serum really well. And now I feel like I can kind of like think of a sound and then like get some kind of approximation out of it with Serum, and I like am quick with it. And I think that that's also really important, is just being like fast with a synth so you don't get like discouraged by trying to get like a particular sound, or at least for me that's really important.
Right, or just bogged down trying to getting lost in the weeds trying to make a particular sound.
Yeah. One thing that I'm curious about from both of you is like there was an interview with what's his name? He's in trade with Blawan. He's in British Murder Boys. Surgeon. Yeah. So there was a thing with Surgeon where he was like, I have full sessions where I just like play. And like it's a sound synthesis session. So I'm not trying to make a track. I'm just like messing around and making interesting sounds and like not putting them in the context of like actually making a song out of them. And that's like, that was interesting to me because I'm like, oh, I could just have full sessions where I get lost in the weeds and there's no like track in mind that I'm trying to make. And it's just like exploratory versus having an idea or trying to come up with an idea and then make a full track out of it. And so, this like technical basic synth knowledge stuff, I think is useful when you start having sessions that are just like, I'm going to design some random sounds and like mess around and turn knobs and like figure out what responses I can get from a particular synth,
Yeah, Andrew Huang says the same thing. He made a video about that probably a year ago or something, where he talks about especially being a DAW user, where it's super helpful to have those sound design sessions so that you don't get lost in the weeds, or you just sit around. And I've took his advice and have done that a couple times, and it definitely does help when you, I don't know, sit down and make 10 kick drums or 5 kick drums, and then you can just throw one onto a track, and it definitely speeds things along to a degree.
Yeah. And like the next step for me was always like doing some exploratory sessions, but inevitably that kind of leads to me making like some loops. But then I'm like, okay with just having those loops and like putting them in my Ableton library. And then when I start assembling another track, I'm like, oh wait, like I have this thing that I made like a month ago that all it ever was a loop, but I just like drop it into the track. And then it's like, okay, suddenly I have melody and like a great sound that came from like a different session where I wasn't focused on making a track. I was just making sounds. I was just making loops. And like a lot of my tracks have come together that way, where I'm like have like a big folder of just like ideas from other sessions that never become real tracks, you know what I mean? And then it's like you end up putting two tracks together, or like an idea from another session into an existing track.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know, I guess I've done it a little bit, but not too much. One piece of advice that kind of changed how I approach it sometimes, which I get, it's a bit in the opposite direction, but also similar. So with, I think his name was Hannes something, I forget his last name. He's like a huge modular system. It was him, and then also Stefan Bodzin in an interview, and they were talking about like how they approach like making tracks and using synths. And then they were saying, I like think of the track and then I record the whole synth, like from the hardware synth, like with all the knob turning, and then you have it like that's like basically set, which makes it really lively. And you're not like recording a 4 or 8 bar loop and then like putting some effects that change on it or something like that later, but you're really like changing the sounds. So I really like to do that. Usually I don't have the track in mind, but I'm just like, if I have a sound and then I record like 10 minutes of me kind of more fucking around with it in different ways, and then maybe using like 2 minutes here, or like maybe 4 minutes. That was helpful.
Yeah,
But it's kind of
Hannes
hard.
Biga.
Yes, Hans Biga.
Yeah, that with the live automation, it's a hard thing to do unless you have like the full hardware setup to be able to just do a track in one take and not have to worry about any of the other externalities that.
But actually, I don't mean like all the, like not the drums or anything, like just the synth. Just the synth. And then you can add everything else later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I just like a lot of the like drone ambient stuff that I've made, some of which like just was released. I have never like the way that all of that comes together for me is like establishing a process with actually an outboard thing with knobs on it, because you often have like a lot of parameters that you want to modulate, but it's really tedious and hard to stay creative if you're modulating them and then like playing it back and then like modulating, like drawing in all the modulation. And so I just like take my push, assign a few parameters from like different effects that I'm using on a particular like drone sound, and then just do like a full run through like recording of the track where I'm just spinning the knobs and like doing live automation basically. And then that's like how I can like stay creative while doing it, is basically like live automating stuff. And so whenever anything ambient happens for me, it's always unlike the kind of like loop and clip based productions that I think characterize like techno and stuff with more complex drum patterns more clearly, using just like some outboard gear or something just with a knob that you can like assign to a parameter. It makes it like really helpful when you're constructing tracks that way.
What's your SoundCloud?
I think, yeah, there'll be like links posted. I'm sure I can send it to you on Instagram or something.
Cool. Yeah, from my side, I have nothing else for now. But yeah, I'm excited. Next semester, we'll definitely love to have like sessions in person, just like kind of jam / workshop / yeah, just making music.
Yeah, certainly. You're the new music production board, eh?
Yeah, with Darren. So I kind of
Yeah.
sharing responsibilities.
Sweet.
Yeah, well, we'll get some cool stuff going for sure.
And I'm also excited for the Memco compilation.
Yes, Memco Compilation end of I don't know, end of the semester. When even is that? End of
It's like April, end of April.
May. Yeah, yeah, it'll be good. Got to start working
Sweet.
on.
I'm gonna take like a 5-minute break and then I will come back and do it if that's good with you guys.
Sounds good. Actually, it is kind of shitty, and I'm sorry, but I actually have to leave because I'll talk to my family.
All good.
And I didn't have, or there was no other time.
All right, we are back recording. All right, Sam,
cool.
The floor is yours.
Sweet. Yeah. So I was just saying before we restarted the recording that I went back through my camera roll and added some fun old Memco memories from back in the day, which is super fun. So yeah, I'm really excited to have this archived, and it might be useful to people kind of like trying to get their music out there in the future, which seems like the age-old question, but it's constantly shifting, and in the current landscape, it's like a very weird set of answers that you get. So this is labels, how to get your music heard. Bio and a few qualifications. I'm Sam Franz. I'm like currently a producer and DJ, and I'm also like a label person operator. I live in Philadelphia now. I was in Memco from 2018 to 2020, which sounds really short, but it had a big impact on me, introduced me to underground electronic music, got me back into DJing and production, which I had done before, but like I think this, Memco like meant a lot to me. And so, it was important that I did that. I organized and threw a few parties with Memco at 517 South 4th Avenue, which if you see I guess you can't see my cursor, but Nathan, you can see the slides, right? By the way, just want to double check.
Yes.
You're not seeing the presenter notes. Okay, perfect. So yeah, I threw some parties at 517 South 4th Avenue, which you can see pictured here. My old house in Ann Arbor, which some people might know about. And then right as I was graduating, me and another person in Memco, Leo, who was in Memco for about the same time as me, maybe a little longer, we started Nonesuch, which is a label. At the time, we didn't exactly have a huge vision for what the label was going to be. But I'm happy to say that it's, grown, it's like surpassed all of our expectations about it. And I'm just like constantly humbled and happy by all of the cool things that we get to do together. The core team also is like almost exclusively former or current Memco people. So I got to give my quick shout outs to Kinsey Harvey, Jamie Johnson, Jordan Stanton, Kat Marchenko, Nathan, Leo, Lucas Kraft, who was Memco adjacent, and many, many other friends that we've met along the way in Berlin and Philadelphia and New York City and Atlanta and, Detroit, Ann Arbor area. Like Alex is someone that I met while I was in Memco back in Detroit. And so it's just been like a very fun and cool ride. As I said, I went back through to find some old pictures. So this is like a funny one when we were graduating, like right as the pandemic was starting. Admittedly, I think I personally have a small amount of experience compared to some people, but Nonesuch has released like 15-ish different pieces of like music content over the past 2 years. And so I have like something to say about this. I'm also focusing mostly on producers and DJs, not just DJs, because DJing and getting yourself out there as just as a DJ is a different ball game. But I hope that people who just DJ can draw some things from this presentation. It's just that labels perhaps are a little less important in that context when you're just a DJ. And so some of the pieces about artist development might still be useful to you that I'm going to talk about. To give a bit of context, Nonesuch has also like thrown some parties in New York City and Berlin primarily thus far. And so those are like 2 of the cities that we operate in. We've released 2 vinyl releases, 3 cassette releases, and a few digital things, as well as some charity compilations, which are big digital compilations where we donate all of the proceeds to them to charity. We just released one a bit ago. This year we have 4 to 5 vinyls on the schedule, plus a few digital releases, you know, at least 3 more events in Berlin, some planning happening in New York City and Philadelphia. And so because of our like transatlantic nature, Leo and Lucas live in Berlin and Leipzig, we've been able to, I think, accomplish some really interesting and fun stuff by just being on 2 continents and making some cool stuff happen. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also a DJ and producer who's had a couple of releases myself on None Such, our label, and then a French label called Take Hit, as well as you know, some self-released stuff. And so this was instructive for me to put together because it reminded me of kind of the basics of like getting your music out there and how to get it heard and so forth. So the agenda, I'm kind of breaking it up in 2 ways. One is how do you get your music heard? How do you do it yourself? And there's a few different things that I'll talk about here. And then second is I'll talk about labels. This is kind of the side that I know most. And then I'll also take you through what a successful release looks like based on something that we've done in None Such. So the basic question is, how do you get your music heard? The first section will focus on like what you can do, and the second section will focus on what labels do and how they can help you. And I think personally, I think labels are probably the best way to get your music heard. They're the best people to get in contact with, provided that you get in touch with the right ones, which is something we'll talk about as well. But yeah, I you know, it's there's 2 different sides to it, between like you self-releasing and then you getting in touch with communities and networks that can help you get your music out there. And so I hope, you know, both sides of it, I can talk a bit about how both sides of that equation work and why I think labels are probably the best, most interesting way to get your music out there, primarily because they have money and they're, you know, a team of people who are working on your release, and it's not just yourself. It can definitely get exhausting to finish music and then end up doing all of the promo yourself as well, and all of the other elements as well. And then I'll just also conclude with some of the basic takeaways from the presentation. So yeah, without further ado, section 1 is how to get your music heard. Again, you can see we got a nice little Memco pic here from back in the day from one of the parties that we threw. So some of the faces might be recognizable. The first section here is just have good music. And, you know, this is obvious, but worth emphasizing. Some of the people that None Such has signed are, or signed the quickest and have gotten successful the quickest from us signing them, are people who have a full album or a full EP ready to go when they send music. So having something public facing, and then also having like a project on deck always, should someone ask you, should you reach out to a label who says, we want to release something, being prepared with some music that you're really confident in, I think is a big confidence booster for yourself, and also the label's confidence in you, so they can get, you know, some like fresh tracks to their ears immediately. And so just having like a little bit of a back catalog, and then constantly producing is another thing here. Sending music to people over time is really important, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but kind of like having good music and having lots of music is the first part of the equation. So putting the time in and just like having a big private playlist on SoundCloud with like, you know, I would say at least like 4 tracks that are unreleased that you're like, these are pretty much done, you know, or they're like demos that maybe just need a little mixing, is a good strategy to have, should you get in touch with any kind of outlet that wants to put out some of your music. So yeah, having good music is important, and you know, the other 2 presentations have focused on how you can do that. So this is like, if this presentation begins to become important once you feel like you have a direction artistically and you have some music you're ready to put out. Second is having an artistic direction. Another picture from the basement of 517, where Mary and Kat were shooting some stuff back when Leo and I used to DJ together under the name Kafka, throwback. So some, you know, this is kind of like an artist development question. None Such, I think, aspires to be a full suite for people so that we can release music, but also offer them advice about how to develop an artistic direction. there's no surefire way to do this. You know, it's like totally based on what you're personally feeling. I think some good questions to ask are, how do you fit into contemporary music? Who are the labels that you identify with? Who are the people that inspire you a lot? Who are the communities that you want to be a part of? Who do you want to be in touch with? What releases matter to you a lot? What are some scenes, some ideas, some movies, some pictures, some colors, some vibes that inspire you? Even just having like a folder of these on your desktop that like helps you kind of collage an image is really important, because you want to leave like an impression on people, obviously, and you want to be recognizable as a DJ, you know? And so picking something that, you know, doing something that I think a lot of people do makes you less recognizable, you know, and that's not a bad thing. Like, you can have whatever vibe you want. I think it's just important to think about, what are the like 5 bullet points that describe me? What is the impression that I want to leave on people? And then trying to put that into your music, or communicating that to the people that are releasing your music when they're developing promotional materials is really important. And just kind of like having that basic framework for like, who am I as an artist? What do I want people to see in me? Because of course, like, you know, you don't have to like put your entire personality into the music that you release. You just have to give like an artificial image of yourself that's just related to the music portion, that helps a label or a community, or even yourself, like when you're putting together artwork or asking a friend to do some artwork for you. You want to think about like, how do you curate something that looks attractive? What makes you identifiable among a ton of producers that are working equally as hard as you, who have, you know, equally as large vaults of great music, and who are also trying to get into the very same scenes that you are trying to get into. And so a big portion of music is the music. And we've already said, you know, it's just like having good music is the basic element. But the second one is having an artistic direction that you think describes your music. I think the third point here, oh, my headphones are dying. Let me just swap them.
Nathan, can you hear me okay? I just switched to my computer. Okay, cool. So the third thing that is really important, I think, is friends and communities. So, you know, another fun Memco pick, that was a community of people who threw some parties at 517. This is probably the most important piece here, and maybe you should have been one of the first ones that I talked about, but this is kind of like the logical progression for me. So Memco obviously is one such community. Send music to your friends, get excited about your music in front of your friends, get your friends excited about your music, ask them for feedback. Those are all important things. And so Memco is like already a space that like checks this box, basically, is like, you know, you can come up through Memco, you can come up through whatever else. I think one thing that's becoming increasingly important is joining online communities like Discord servers, contributing to discussions there, help, you know, getting other people excited about your music, asking for feedback in those arenas. That's another like important thing, is joining online communities. I have like a friend who's a very successful producer in Philadelphia who doesn't really know that many people in Philadelphia, but he has been, you know, an active member in many online communities for a long time, and that's how his music got out there. So, you know, one of the nice things about the emergence of online communities in music is you don't have to have a community like in the city that you live in, although like Memco people already have that, it seems like. So it's great. But I think like community is like the core piece here, getting your music heard, like having a community who wants to listen to your music that are like friends of yours is the way that you kind of start out. Providing feedback to other artists, being willing to learn from them, and just like focusing on like building connections and friendships. I think the equation here is just always that those connections and friendships will always deliver way more than you feel like you put in. They'll always, you know, end up meaning much more than the amount of effort that you feel like you put in, just like listening to that track that someone sent you and giving feedback, and, you know, being a good participant in communities and friendships surrounded, like, that are based on music. It's like the surefire way to get people to listen to your music and get people excited about it, and also be willing to like take suggestions and learn from people like that. So None Such for us is a collective. It's not just a label. We're obviously dispersed across a number of cities and continents. And, you know, in each city, we also have a group of people who are supportive of the label, who want to work with us, et cetera. And I think this matters a lot for us personally, perhaps more than anything else. Unlike a lot of labels, we actually don't have like one big DJ who's behind it. Like none of the people who run Nonesuch are independently successful DJs or music producers. And so like community is like the core piece for us, and just like having different communities in different cities has meant a lot for like how we've grown, and if people, you know, care about what we're doing and want to participate in what we're doing. Parties are obviously one way of doing this. Showing up to parties means a lot, like just like going, talking to the DJ, you know, like that sort of like legwork means a lot. Going to record stores is like another thing that I do, and just sort of like putting yourself out there and like trying to make connections means a lot. And that's one way that you can get your music heard. Of course, like none of this guarantees that you get your music heard, but like you need people to know about you, that you're a producer and you're a DJ in whatever scene or city you're operating in, before like anyone is going to give a shit about the music that you're producing. And so like in a lot of ways, the friends communities thing like begins with just showing up and saying hello, and like going to parties because you want to be involved in the community that's throwing the party. Networking is kind of a bad word, but being willing to meet people and develop professional relationships or friendships means a lot over time. And I think, you know, I'm emphasizing community, but I think like when you hear about producers that come up, and this is true for Nonesuch as well, it's like they rarely come up by just getting like heard by someone random, but it's usually, you know, a set of friendships that like, you know, pay dividends over time and like mean a lot to you as you continue to be a producer. And so doing like what is basically networking is really important. And I can give a personal example, like Alex Wilcox, I met at a random event at TV Lounge in Detroit way before I started, you know, we started Nonesuch like years ago. And now he's popping off. He's going to be huge. He's remixing some stuff for the label. We're booking him at a party that we have coming up in the Netherlands. You know what I mean? Like that relationship that I made over 3 years ago, you know, now like that we've both grown, like Nonesuch, and then Alex Wilcox is like a producer and DJ. We're able to like work together that way. And so it's like very cool that we get to do that. And that just comes from like establishing those connections and just showing the fuck up, basically. Finally, this last one, I game the algorithm I put here. This is actually what I know least about, and so I'm not really going to talk about it. It's when you post music and it gets picked up by a DSP playlist, like Spotify or Apple Music playlists it, or it randomly gets played by someone because they found it on SoundCloud. In my experience, this is actually not how most people get their music heard, just like putting it up and expecting people to find you. It's something that happens, and it's cool when it happens. And so always having some public facing music is really important. But it's, in my experience, not actually how people will like find you or want to work with you or sign you to a label. It does happen though. It totally does happen. And so I don't want to discount it. And like, if your music is that good, people will find you. It's usually, in my experience, just a longer process that happens slowly. Very rarely do artists just randomly explode because their music got picked up by an algorithm on one of these websites. The initial push that you give it through the community that you're involved with, typically I think means a lot more than just like putting your music up and hoping people discover it or listen to it. You know what I mean? So unless you're just making music for yourself, if you want people to hear your music, it always begins with like the community that you're a part of and the connections and friendships that you have, and probably less so putting it up on Spotify. And that's like the unfortunate truth, is like there's lots of people who go unnoticed, even though they're putting music out. And even a lot of the people who you see explode online are often part of online communities that give their music the initial push so that it can become bigger. And so I don't think putting your music up, expecting it to get playlisted on Spotify is ever a substitute for the kind of like community and friends that you need to like get your music heard. Another piece of getting your music heard is promo. in quotes. Promo is basically just a word that means sending your music for free to people who don't know you that well. One way to do this is just to send it to DJs that you think would like what you're doing. I think in my experience, most DJs will listen to stuff. If you just scour Discogs and SoundCloud and Bandcamp, you'll find like contact information, or just like Instagram DM is powerful. And just like sending some music, being like, hey, you know, I like what you're doing. I think you might be interested in some tracks that I have, is a great way to like get your music heard by people, is just literally send it to DJs who mean something to you, and ask them to take a listen. Sometimes they'll listen and they won't reply to you. Sometimes they'll listen and download the track and play it and they still won't reply to you. Sometimes they'll give you feedback, you know, sometimes they'll say a quick sentence. There's a bunch of different ways that this happens, but just like the same way that you got to show up, you also just have to be like constantly sending your music to people who you think might like it, and repeatedly doing so, but not in an annoying way. I think that matters. It shows that, you know, you're committed to like actually getting your music heard and getting it out there. So of course I put a nice picture of Jamie and I, who are DJs, playing some tunes in Ann Arbor. And so maybe we're some of the DJs that someone could send music to. Another one is radio. This picture is from WCBN. It was like a Memco takeover that we did. So radio stations or friends that work in radio might play what you want. And those are people that you should definitely reach out to, just send music to. Sometimes radio stations have like email inboxes that they reserve for promo. And so, you know, they'll just get emails from people periodically with new releases asking them to be played on the radio. And this is another way that you can make people aware of your music. Another one is online friends. This kind of goes with the online communities thing, but a lot of Discord servers have places where you can just like send tracks and people will, you know, say something about them. You know, just sort of like constantly sending your music to different people. Radio is like, I think, a good one that's underappreciated, but sending them to online friends is important. Of course, there's a bunch of groups that are not mentioned here, but the point is that focusing on just sending your music around to people matters a lot. You don't know who's going to play it. You don't know for whom they're going to play it. You don't know who might hear it because you sent it to someone. And it's important to note that a lot of this is partly just about like putting the legwork in. And this doesn't just go for getting your music heard, but also like getting venues if you want to throw a party, making connections, getting gigs, blah, blah, blah. Like you just got to be sending your stuff. And one of the things that I think has made Nonesuch successful, that has made Nonesuch successful rather, is we're just relentless about like reaching out to people. And like a non-reply does not deter us. And so like we're constantly just sending, sorry. We're constantly just sending Instagram DMs and emails to people that we respect. And just saying like, hey, would you like to work with us? We respect you, you know, that type of stuff. And I think that matters a lot, is just being relentless about like reaching out to people and not letting a no response deter you, and following up with people also who read it or, you know, didn't respond to it, especially via email, is important. I already talked about going to record stores, meeting producers in person, having phone calls, blah, blah, blah. All of this is how you begin to build a strong foundation and group of supporters around your music, people that care about it, people that are going to listen to it, people that when you put a new release out are going to be like, hey, I'll check that out. That'll be on my listening for the day. The final one is other producers and DJs are really important. Getting feedback is a cool thing. You see Ali here DJing in the basement of 517. Making people aware of your music this way is important. When you think you have something hot, you know, ask friends for help, ask for feedback, ask if they want the file, etc., so that they can play it. It's really just making people aware of the fact that you're even producing music in the first place. Often I think because many of us are music producers, we just expect people to know that we're music producers. And it's like almost nobody, you know, typically knows that you're a music producer outside of the community that you're in. And so just sending music to people and making people aware in the first place that you're even producing music is really important. And if the quality is there, it will speak for itself. And so it doesn't need to be more than a quick sentence and then a SoundCloud link with download enabled if you want them to be able to play it. You will, if you do this, send lots of emails and messages that won't get responded to, and that's totally fine. That's part of the game. And as I said, you know, with None Such, we just reach out to like everyone constantly, and lots of those are non-responses, and that's totally fine. It's having the like perseverance to continue to do so that's important. And I already said this, but I'm going to emphasize it one more time. Being relentless about reaching out to people, like different people, even if it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 respond and give you a listen, that's way more than you previously had. And so just constantly digging, coming up with lists of people that you think might be in, you know, into the music that you want, people that inspire you or are adjacent to the people that inspire you. All of this is kind of like important stuff. I think, like, you know, hopefully you'll find that lots of people are just interested in like building community and like being in touch with other DJs and producers. And so sending music to them, you know, in my experience, lots of people also respond affirmatively because they just like want to know people and want to get involved. And so like some of the people that are now releasing stuff on None Such who are based in LA, I've never been to LA, but it was just like a scene that I really liked. I liked the extended release parties. And so I started reaching out to people from those. And then before you know it, you know, a couple people who had played those parties happened to be in New York City when we were there. And they ended up working, you know, with None Such on a radio takeover. And so it's like that sort of stuff was just because we sent some off the cuff messages to people being like, hey, let's collaborate somehow. And hopefully those people are interested in just like being a part of community and aren't, you know, too competitive about it and want to help you and let you help them and establish connections that way. So the next part of the presentation is focused on labels, which is the thing that I know. This is the imaginary MemCorp Incorporated label that maybe Memco already started, can start. This is from like a board meeting when I was on the Memco board. So quickly about labels, they've changed a lot, or at least in the underground music stuff, they perform a very specific set of functions that are different from like big labels out in the world. In large industry contexts, they can give you recording budgets, advances on releases, etc. Although most underground labels just release music that's already finished. Sometimes they'll give you an advance against future revenue for a record, depending on how they think it will perform. But most of the time they won't, you know, want to do anything until you have like finished music that's been delivered to the label, and then like the machine starts operating in your favor. And so that's part of the reason that I earlier said it's good to have like some vaults or like a finished project that you can deliver should a label want to get in touch with you. What do labels do in the underground music context? They usually coordinate promotional material, or they can coordinate promotional material. They manufacture physical stuff. They get your music out to different people. They're kind of like platforms. So they often have existing audiences. And then when you join them for a release, that means new people are hearing your music. Typically they're based around a sound or set of sounds or a place or something like that. And so finding labels that you think fit your artistic vision is an important piece of this puzzle. Is basically developing like lists of labels that you want to send promotion to, from the biggest labels all the way down to the smallest ones. Some questions you might want to ask are, how do you tell that a label is a good label? Some ways of answering this question are first asking like, how do they release music? What kind of promo do they do? Are you looking for physical releases? Do they distribute physical releases? Do they do physical releases? Who is their distributor? What kind of shops buy their records? Have you been to a record store where you've seen one of their releases? How organized are they? I think is an important but underappreciated element to this. So asking, you know, are they responsive? Do they seem like they're together? Are they going to, you know, pay you should your music make lots of money? Are they the kind of community that you want to be a part of? What, you know, What have you heard about the parties maybe that the label is showing about? What have you heard about the people at a label? I would say be sure to talk to them on the phone. This is like something that Nonesuch emphasizes a lot, is like meeting everyone that we release either in person or just having a phone call to like feel them out and like see what they're like. Because you can, obviously we all know you can like learn a lot about a person by talking to them on the phone. And you know, if you don't know that much about a label, except just like looking at their releases, I think it's very important to get a sense of like who's running the label, what are they like, what are they doing, and then you can make a decision about whether you want to release music with them. Do they organize events? Do they have a booking agency attached to them? What are you looking for, and do they fit with that vision? If your music is good and you're going to release it, it's definitely important, I think, to also think like, does the label's output and what they do fit with the vision and the communities that you want to be a part of? Do they kind of fit with like the productions that you're making? Are they the right place to start releasing your music? Having long-term relationships with labels is also wonderful. Like doing multiple releases with a single label, I think is important and can establish you know, a group of listeners around a label and then around you as an artist. And so like being careful about who you want to work with in the first place can help develop those like lasting relationships that I think mean a lot if the label is like ambitious, if they're trying to do, you know, a lot of stuff. How do you contact labels? Typically you reach out to an A&R person. This means artists and repertoire, but in the underground space, you know, that's just a carryover term from like the big industry side. In the underground space, many people wear multiple hats. And so like in the Nonesuch context, everyone who does day-to-day for the label also does A&R. And so it's like people, you're just reaching out to someone who probably runs the label. It might even be just one person who does everything for the label. So keep that in mind when you're reaching out to them. I would say, you know, check Discogs, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Instagram. There are many ways to get in touch with people. Finding an email if you're going to send demos is usually the best way, but also just hitting someone up on Instagram is important. I think most labels will listen to your stuff even if they don't reply. It's very easy in this context to get discouraged, but I think it's okay, especially when you're reaching out to a label, to send a follow-up email and then just move on to the next one. In the past, this usually looks like saying something like, hey, I'd like to move on to a different label or try this music with a different label. So I'm hoping you might be able to say whether or not you're interested in the project or something like that, just so you can get a reply, be sure that they've listened to it, be sure that they're not interested in releasing it, or maybe they are. And that's like a good strategy for going to labels. It also, you know, when people reply to you, typically that they'll definitely listen to your music then. And this makes you known to them, which is important, because sending music over time to labels, every time you develop a new project or your sound progresses, continually sending music to labels, I think is good, because you're already on their radar. They know you. They may feel more comfortable listening to the second time you send them music or the third time you send them music. And so it's important to kind of do that. And you know, following up, getting them to reply maybe, and then just moving on to the next one, but keeping them in mind for future releases. Like a negative could come for a variety of reasons. It's, you know, sometimes not even about the music, but like if someone asks Nonesuch that if they want to release something, like they said, I want to release something this year, 2022, like our schedule is like full for this year. And I think a lot of people have that kind of thing. A lot of labels have that kind of thing where they're, especially if you're doing vinyl, they're planning, you know, 8 to 12 months ahead. And so negatives could come because they're just swamped with work, not because the music is bad, not because they don't want to work with you. And so kind of being willing to continually send music to people, having them reply to you are kind of important tools for getting in touch with labels. I would say also, if you're, you know, getting down to the nitty gritty, when you're sending a message to a label, it should be a little bit more than a generic, like, here's my music, please, you know, submit it for consideration. It's like the first sentence of these kinds of emails, I think, you know, in successful cases, include something personal to the label. So like, what in the label's catalog caught your attention? Was there something about their graphics, their vision, their initiatives that made you reach out to them? Saying something about this and showing that you like care and know who the label is, I think means a lot in terms of like getting a response from the label. You can like, we get demo emails, labels in general get demo emails that are like a dime a dozen, it's just like copy paste. And that makes, I think, people a little less receptive to your music. And so showing that you care about the specific label that you're sending music to is helpful. Getting a list of labels, being consistent with it, and continue sending music, even if they don't reply the first time, are all important pieces of this that I've already talked about. Another one is finding creative ways to get the attention of labels, especially if you're going to a big label. So Alex Wilcox has this funny story, and he'll have to tell it to different people at some point, where back before he was signed to Mama Told Ya, he had this like whole Russian doll aesthetic. And so this is part of the like, artistic direction that he was going in. And he sent like physical Russian dolls. And you had to like, undo like 4 Russian dolls. And then in there was like a USB stick with the music on them. And that like got his music heard by a bunch of big labels who I think otherwise wouldn't have replied to like a simple email. So kind of like being able to get the attention of people by being creative about how you send your music is also another interesting and I think worthwhile strategy to get labels to listen to your stuff. If that means like shipping them something, if that's what you think you want to do, that's a cool way to do it. I think. Also, people they reach out to labels all the time. They have some good music publicly facing, but then having vaults and always having project ready to go should anyone reach out to you is a great strategy. And I kind of already talked about this. And so those are some ways that you might reach out to labels and how you can kind of curate the list of labels that you're reaching out to in the first place. So next is, what does a label actually do? What does a successful release look like? And here I'm going to use the example of like our most successful release, which is the Tonic projects. So it had 3 parts. There was a record, Tonic Noise, there was an event, Tonic Motion, and there was a zine called Tonic Visions. So for us, a successful release had the following things. First, it had a concept. So for this release, it was in collaboration with Femme Bass Mafia, which is an organization in Berlin that does DJ workshops similar to Memco for female and non-binary people. The album had only women and non-binary artists on it. And it was also, this bigger collaboration between Nonesuch and Femme Bass Mafia, where our event had panels where people talked about club culture, DJ workshops, etc. Some people to shout out quickly for the physical side of things, which is the second bullet point, having like an attractive physical packaging for the stuff. The vinyl art direction was done by Kinsey Harvey, and then the artwork was done by Kat Marchenko and Jamie Johnson, as well as the poster for the event. The zine was done by Kat Marchenko. She interviewed the artists who were a part of the release and then compiled their answers into a great zine that comes with every copy of the record. And then there was also the event, which was at About Blank, or in Germany, in Berlin. So there was a concept behind the release. There was a physical element to it that had 3 different parts. There was promo items involved. So in this case, it looked like Instagram reels that showed off the zine and the music. There was cool animations with the like label and clips of the tracks that we could send out. Videos, easily shareable things that do well on some of the platforms that we work on. So like SoundCloud snippets and Instagram reels that played little bits of the tracks. We obviously planned the event in Berlin, which included members of Femme Bass Mafia's latest like trainee class, because they go in cohorts. And there was planned workshops, a panel with speakers about club culture, as I already said. And so these were all like physical elements. They were promo items, and it worked in this case. We sold out of the record, partly because it was based around 2 different communities, Nonesuch and Femme Bass Mafia. And I think this kind of takes us back to the community concept and why it's so important. Is like the DJs obviously had like audiences, but one of the reasons that it sold out, in my opinion, is because Fembase Mafia and None Such had communities around them, people who are paying attention to what we were doing. And we had like friendships and networks. And then when we put something out into both of those networks with this kind of promotional push, with a special emphasis on the physical stuff, with, you know, a special zine with interviews from the artists included in the record, that just takes you like a step above what other people are doing when they just release a vinyl, and that becomes interesting to people. And so, you know, in this case, like, I think like these types of steps that try to differentiate a release from a different one are one reason that you may or may not want to work with a particular label that you're reaching out to. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of like what one release looked like. I'm omitting a lot of like organizational work that the day-to-day people did, and kind of like assembling the artists, talking to a mastering engineer, making sure, you know, digital distribution was set, having relationships with pressing plants and stuff like that. But all of that is like handled on the label side, and I'm happy to, you know, answer questions about that or go into it later, like how those relationships go. But from the perspective of someone who's producing music, like, I think this is a good example of a project that we did that was relatively successful. And so that's kind of like what a label can do. And all of this obviously requires like some money. And so that's another thing that labels can do, is they'll put a lot of time and attention and money into the promotion and distribution of a release, which expands the audience that is listening to your music in the first place. And so that's one of the reasons that labels with a platform, with a team, with care to particular releases can expand the listening audience that you would have. So yeah, in conclusion, I think community kind of is number one, and I hope to have emphasized that throughout the presentation. Having, you know, just like putting the legwork in terms of like building friendships and you know, relationships within a scene that you're in is really important to getting your music heard. Sending your music out to people like a lot is really important. This means that you have to dig for platforms and labels a lot too. So like spending time on Bandcamp and SoundCloud, just like finding new places that are releasing interesting music is really important, because that's, you know, how you curate that list of labels that you eventually want to send your music out to. And then finally, finding labels that fit with what you're going for, that you think do good work and fit with the artistic vision that you have, is another way that, you know, another thing that I hope to have emphasized. It's like not just sending your music to people, not just sending your music to a label, but sending your music to the label that you think can, you know, properly promote your release, that has a following from a community that you're trying to get ears from is kind of like an important piece of this puzzle. So yeah, this is the email, the Nonesuch email, contact@nonesuch.dance. Should anyone want to, you know, ask questions about stuff in this presentation, or you know, has music that they think might fit with what we're doing. But yeah, I just, you know, Memco holds a special place in my heart, so I wanted to make, you know, ourselves available to people who might be potentially interested in what we're doing in the communities that we're interested in. And so yeah, that is the thing. And thanks again for the opportunity to like say some stuff about it.
Yeah, it's very pertinent information. It's a lot of stuff that's that you know, but then you just need some reiteration oftentimes.
Right. Yeah, it is. It definitely is like kind of obvious, I think, a lot of it. But again, like, as I said, it's like reflecting on this and putting the presentation together and then like thinking through all of the steps. It feels totally different because it's like, of course you already know all of this, but it's like actually thinking about it carefully is a whole different ball game. So
yeah, I find it the best thing is to just dig on platforms that do the thing that you want to do. So just, I've spent so much time on Bandcamp and SoundCloud, and to a degree also Discogs, but that's a little bit less relevant. And just finding people that release the music that sounds similar to the stuff you make, just finding generally, you know, organizations of people that you think are cool and would like to work with, because, you know, there's no reason why you can't. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, but it's like you can't if you don't know who's out there. You do gotta do that legwork to get it going.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of collectives that I didn't formerly know about that I've met or, learned about through just going to events in Philadelphia and then reaching out, like cold messaging all of those people on Instagram, and then like getting a chance to talk to them in real life and like see what the scene is like, who the people are. That's like, those are all, I think, really important pieces of the puzzle. It's just like the legwork cannot be understated, even though it's obvious, like it cannot be understated. And there's definitely a difference, and I didn't say this in the presentation, between like reaching out to someone who's not based in your city, but then also trying to like be involved with a scene in your city and platforms that are involved in your city. Those, pay in different ways. So like the producer that I was talking about, who will be releasing on Nonesuch, who's living in Philadelphia, he was like well-known online and is well-known online, but doesn't know that many people in Philadelphia. And it's like, but his focus is on producing music. It's not on DJing. It's not on playing gigs. It's not so much on going to parties. And so for him, that's like a good strategy, is just like being involved in online communities. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. And that's kind of about the like fit between the label and what you want to do, or the community and what you want to do. A lot of these places are just like collectives or platforms that don't have any physical component, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's a piece of it.
Yeah, I think it's all somehow very confusing currently as to like what is the right thing to do. I think in relation to especially like how COVID has changed everybody's perceptions of how social functions function.
Yeah.
Like how to get things happening again. It's like, all right, we just gotta keep going through it slowly now. Keep on. But I think, yeah, just also could be stated again. It's just it's tending to those relationships that will give you those dividends, which sounds kind of whack, but like,
yeah,
I think it's very true.
No, and I mean, as I said, it's like they always end up being more valuable than you ever could possibly imagine. Is like the basic thing. Like when I came to Philly in COVID, it's like I wasn't going to any parties, didn't meet anyone, and then like in the last 8 months, once parties started happening, like just like going to different events from seeing flyers on Instagram was like the biggest thing. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I actually have a community here of people who I like know, and it's like every time I go to a party, it's like I'm seeing people that I know from just showing up, and it's like it's kind of like stupid and annoying to be like, hey, just put in the fucking legwork and like go to the record stores and meet people. But
that's real though.
There's also almost no alternative to that. You know what I mean? Because also like shaking hands, in my experience, is always more meaningful than online relationships. And that's part of the reason that I think like getting people on the phone is really important. Is like, even if you're never going to meet them in person, or you won't meet them in person for like a really long time, just being like, hey, let's have a quick phone call and like chat. Like I want to hear about the scene in LA and like what that is like, and how you think like it should change, or what's good about it or what's bad about it. Like that's how you end up cultivating those kind of relationships that always like end up paying off.
Yeah, I think another thing that's sometimes we get lost in as people who inhabit what is honestly very niche is we just forget how small these scenes are, like
True.
in specific cities, but then also in the global and the internet. But like the world is so small, man. Like when you have a couple things connecting people, like when you have a network formed around a specific thing, be it music, be it art, be it whatever, like that community is then smaller and everybody knows each other, and just it's always worth it to go out and talk to people, go out and shake the hand. And I think also that putting yourself out there is very important, because even if you are not the one to actively make something happen, you're still passively existing, and that then opens up the opportunity for somebody to actively act upon you, and vibe with whatever you're doing. And it's putting yourself out there is putting yourself in a position to be seen by others. And you don't necessarily have to be the one that incites. If your music's good enough and people like it, they'll come up to you. You know, like they
Yeah,
will.
exactly. Yeah. That's
But you do
that's
gotta
brilliant.
be you gotta be there to be able to become up too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
getting out there, it's being active.
Being active. It all comes down to being active, you know, and just like one new form of being active that I tried to talk about is like just just sending messages, sending emails, you know what I mean? Like just do it. And like no, you know, lots of people will just like never get back to you, but just like following up and being like, you know, if like I think it, you know, there's different strategies and like it depends on like how quickly you want to do things and how fast you want to become involved in different scenes and stuff. But my personal approach, and I think this is shared by a lot of the people who are involved in the day-to-day at Nonesuch, is just like being really ambitious and you know sending like lots and lots of cold messages and emails and just like showing up, you know. And not everyone likes that strategy, which is totally fine. Like I'm again just speaking from like my experience, and so that's an important qualifier, is like that to some people is like annoying and pestering because it's like, wow, why is this person like trying so hard to get their shit out there? And so that's like another element of it, I think. But just like being genuine and not making it too businessy all the time, you know, can help.
Yeah, which is hard sometimes, especially for people who are avid creators, and sometimes like when you're so involved with the creation of something, you just forget how to be social.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Well,
Um,
you know, one thing to say about that is like and every like not every connection has to be immediately about like your music. And I think this is really important, is like you can still be super ambitious about meeting people and showing up and sending those messages and stuff, but the message doesn't have to be like, hey, listen to my music. It can be like, hey, I like what you're doing, you know, and I just like to talk about what you're doing. And then like developing that relationship over time, like inevitably if that person is like at all you know, like cool, they will ask you what you're doing, or they'll see what
yeah,
you're doing too. And so it doesn't have to be like, hey, check out my music, you know. You don't even have to say that you're a DJ or whatever like the first time that you talk to someone.
yeah.
But just like setting up that avenue potentially, you know, also becomes really important. Like it is about community at the end of the fucking day, you know what I mean? Because it's like very hard to be purely about people listening to your music and like actually get people to listen to your music. You know, it's like the community comes first, and then like the music listening is a side effect of like making friendships and shit. And like that's for me, and like part of the reason that we have Nonesuch is like that is literally what music is about, is just like being in cahoots with other people. It's not about like being like the biggest DJ, you know, or
Because
it's
you're
not
not
about
going to be a rock star. Like
yeah.
you exist in an underground niche community anyways, so
Mhm.
you just try to maintain that, I think.
Yeah, it's all about community, you know what I mean? And that's and so um getting your music heard is like a sub point of being a part of a music community. You know, like that's kind of one way of saying it.
Yeah, man. All right, I think that's a good place to call it.
Yeah,
We're running out of time here, but thank you
cool.
so much for your presentation. It's
Thank you.
like I said, good information to be archived on the internet. So, all right.